Welcome, everybody. It's really nice to resume the art, the Religion and Art Forums series. I'm, for those of you who haven't, were here for the first time, my name is Nina Danino, and I'm one of the coordinators of the series. The other coordinator is Mark Dean. Mark, do you want to say hello or anything? Yeah. And Mark and I alternate the sessions, so I'll be kind of leading a little bit more on this one. Yeah, really looking forward to kicking off the series again this autumn. We've got four sessions lined up. We have three presenters today, with apologies from one of the presenters, John Shaw, because he suffered an injury over the weekend, I believe, and he emailed today to say that he wouldn't be able to make it today. So he sends his best wishes to the other presenters and greetings to you all, and I'm sure that he'll be joining us again in the future if there's an opportunity. So it's a great pleasure to introduce the three presenters tonight, and they are in the order that they will be presenting: M. Maria Walhout, Sister Carolyn Morrison, and Chris Zongtian Yuan. And so let's go into the first presentation then, who's going to be M. Maria Walhout, who is an artist and a writer, and they're based in London and Amsterdam, between London and Amsterdam, and they are currently undergoing a PhD candidate in art at Goldsmiths. So Maria, I'll just hand over to you. Yeah, I think James said that the presentations are about 20 minutes with a short time for response afterwards. So I'm acting as a sort of timekeeper, so I'll kind of remind people about the time as we go through. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you for having me. I'll just give a short intro to the project that I'll be presenting from, and then we'll be playing a recording of a reading of a text of mine. Yeah, so like Nina said, I'm a writer and artist based between London and Amsterdam, currently in Amsterdam. What I'll be presenting today is part of my PhD research, which is an art practice-based PhD research at Goldsmiths, under the title Indecenting Tongues. And for the research that I'm doing, I'm looking at and working through a practice of glossolalia, specifically through charismatic Christian practice of glossolalia, or speaking in tongues, as well as thinking through and staying with queer and trans identity, looking into how illegibility might be a site for liberation. And so a lot of my work actually rests on a private practice of glossolalia, a private practice of speaking, which for many reasons at the moment is not at all being recorded or being made public. And instead I'm doing writing, which started out as a journaling practice and became sort of a practice of prompt writing, writing towards some sort of future action in some sort of other body. That text is now developing into more of, I guess, a sort of poetic fictional text under the working title A Mouth Prompts. And so I'll be presenting a reading from it. I've pre-recorded it a bit earlier today, just to have a bit of time around it. And the reading that I'm presenting is actually a reading through someone else. So I've fragmented the text that I have into an edit which I've sent to a dear friend of mine who has voiced the text, and what you'll be seeing is me actually revoicing their reading of the text. Also, just to add that there is not a lot of content to the video other than just a recording of me reading it. So if you feel more comfortable reading without listening without watching, then please do feel free. James, over to you.
Okay, sure. Just hang on a second and I'll share my screen.
From a mouth prompt. Prompt for swallowing as baptism, for speaking as exorcism, dreaming of the presence of an otherness, a long-standing and durable transitional history, a real-life experience, the beginning. My breath is held. I know myself to be surrounded. My mouth within a mouth. And slowly held a space of speaking. Slowly and suddenly, slowly, salvifically, slowly, the sound I savor, the sound I hold in the space under my tongue, a sound that dissolves in the space of my saliva. A sound heard in the salty space of my savoring, a sound in the space of salty water, desiring water. Slowly, softly, suddenly, speaking, desiring, speaking. The sound of speaking, desiring, sounding. A speaking that cannot be replicated, but a speaking that carries its echo, that carries the conditions for the possibility of desiring echo. The sound of speaking that knows itself to be held, a speaking of sound that knows itself to dissolve into desire. A real life experience. I wait for you, and almost nothing happens. My breath shudders, eternal wind shudders into my body, shuts itself into me. Breath shudders, shutters, hesitates, glitches as someone runs into me, falls into me, opens up in me, a marked incongruence. In the wet open space of speaking, I know myself to be surrounded. In this expansive space of darkness, presence continually undoes me. My absence continually surrounds me. In the wet, open space of speaking, I know you to be speaking. But surrender does not exist in the one moment. The shuddering breath is the opening of paradox. Another speaking, another speaking. A mouth within a mouth, moving either direction without turning, breathing inward, speaking outward, speaking inward, breathing outward. A beckoning, a beginning. My breath is held. I know myself to be surrounded. Another speaking, another speaking. The speaking of sound that knows itself to dissolve into desire for other. The sound of sounding for echo. The sound of knowing. The mouth in my mouth makes a shape but does not breathe, does not push air, but I wait for you. I wait for almost nothing. I wait for you, and almost nothing happens in the wet, hollow space of my mouth. I know myself to be surrounded. In this interior space of darkness, presence continually precedes and undoes the words. Whom possesses me speaks here, almost speaks here, but almost does not speak. I sigh longingly. The mouth in my mouth makes a shape, bends itself over, reaches, aligns itself, and passes finally through the narrow of my mouth, groaning outwardly, breathing outward, speaking inward, speaking outward, breathing inward. Almost does not speak. I take God's mouth into my mouth, and I intend to breathe. And almost nothing overwhelms me. I catch my breath, and almost nothing. Others speaking. My breath shudders. Eternal wind shudders into my body, shuts into me. Breath shudders. A marked incongruence. The mouth within my mouth shutters, hesitates, glitches, as someone runs into me, falls into me, opens up in me, in the wet, open space of speaking. I know myself to be surrounded in this expansive space of darkness. Presence continually undoes me. Almost nothing surrounds me. In the wet, open space of speaking, I know you to be speaking, desiring, sounding, a sound of speaking, desiring, speaking, a sounding that cannot be replicated, but a sound that carries the conditions for the possibility of desiring echo. A mouth within a mouth, moving either direction without turning, speaking inward, breathing outward, breathing inward, speaking outward. The baptism, the swallowing, a beckoning, but surrender does not exist for the one moment, for other, the sound of sounding, for echo, or some alternative different from oneself, a beginning, another speaking, an other speaking. The mouth in my mouth makes a shape, desires breathing, but does not yet breathe. And almost nothing, an echo for the to come. Thank you.
Great. So if that's the end of the presentation, then anybody who would like to bring up any points at this stage can do so by putting something in the chat, or just by saying it out loud, or they can think about their questions and bring them up again at the end. But we can just wait a little and see if anyone wants to bring something up. Great. Well, why don't we have Nina first, since Nina is the sort of the primary point of organisation here.
Well, I just wanted to maybe just ask you about revoicing. Could you say a little bit more, Ginula, because that just to sort of touch base with what I was hearing and what I was seeing and whose voice it is, because you mentioned revoicing as a method.
Yeah. So the text was written by me, and I felt it. I wasn't quite comfortable with. I've been sitting with this text for so long, and I didn't want to just read the text. And I've been wanting to share. I mean, throughout the past time, this practice with others, and so what I did for this reading is I actually sent the text to a dear friend of mine who sent me a voice recording of them reading it, which on the video I'm listening to their recording in my ear while I'm speaking. So it's almost sort of like revoicing of their interpretation of the text or of their intonation of it. So it's at some points quite different from how I would have maybe read the text myself. So I'm reading actually their rereading their reading, let's say.
Thank you.
Okay. There's a question in the chat from Geraldine Franklin asking, how does this connect to speaking in tongues? Could you talk a bit more about that?
I guess the writing comes out of sort of a longer practice of speaking in tongues, and of thinking about it, being with it, being with the practice. I mean, there's some more explicit references, I think, in the text that refer directly to an experience of it. I would say it's mostly a sort of, for me, it's been a lot of like slowing down into the practice and sort of being sort of almost meditatively with the practice, trying to feel it in the body, trying to understand it in the body. And so parts of it are fragments of my own experiences from journaling about the experience. Some of it is trying to write it towards someone else, or trying to write a prompt in which someone might be able to grasp some of that experience. And then so those are a few of the ways that it is being addressed in the writing, if that makes sense. I don't know if that answers the question, but
I want
sorry, Geraldine, your voice,
the deity or Christ that you. Yes. Sorry.
We couldn't hear your question.
Can I say it again?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. No, I just wondered to what extent you felt in your revoicing. You felt perhaps in revoicing potentially. Did you feel you could really connect in some way with a deity, Christ, or, could you say a little bit more about the feelings in your body of feeling a unison or a sort of connection in some way?
I guess it sort of comes back to glossolalia experience, I think, also with the revoicing, in the sense that they are both a sort of speech taboo or language taboo. I mean, they're sort of something you're following while you're doing it. So there's a sense of surrendering to someone else's voice while also having to actively act out the voice. So I don't know in the revoicing if I would necessarily speak about a connection to a deity, but there's definitely a sort of feeling of an intimacy with. I mean, also the person who voiced it is someone very dear to me. So yeah, there is definitely a sense of intimacy, I would say, in that I think also exists in glossolalia practice. Yeah.
I'll just read these two, Jane. There's a comment here from.
Do you know much about the?
Sorry, Geraldine, we've lost you. Shall I just read these two comments out in the meantime? There's a comment, an artist recommended by Shona Beaumont, Anima Mundi, Paul Benny, speaking in tongues at the Venice Biennale. And
hello?
Yeah, Geraldine, I'll just read.
Hello?
Yeah, you're there, you're back now? I'll just read the second comment from Louise Ashcroft to everybody in the meantime. Maria, I like the way you addressed how you felt unsure how to read this text yourself by entrusting it to someone else's mouth whom you then echo. It's a strategy to get a kind of trust and intimacy, which you've just said, yeah, and vulnerability maybe, that you feel the reading and process of this text and of glossolalia needs. And then she added, also sometimes love of gods feels hierarchical, but here there is a feeling of love that goes between the present self and the absent friend and the expectation of God, who is almost not arriving.
That's beautiful, Louise. Thank you. Yeah. You don't have much to add to that, but yeah, it's lovely.
There are two hands up. Kate Pickering, you've had your hand up for a while. Would you like to come on audio or on camera?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm not going to come on camera just because there may be random family members appearing in the background. So I'm just going to speak if that's okay. But Maria, massive thanks for sharing your work. I really enjoyed that. I found it really generous and generative, and it kind of provoked quite a lot of thoughts. So I just thought maybe I would share a few of those things that was bringing up for me, although some of the things have been touched upon by other people as well. But I think the word intimacy has already come up, and that was an overwhelming sense for me that you're embodying an intimacy in the piece, and that there was a kind of channeling going on. And it took me a while to figure out that you were listening through your earbud to somebody else speaking. And my initial impression was that there were these kind of waves rolling in of kind of a kind of channeling of something else elsewhere. And obviously I didn't know at the start that it was literally coming in through an earpiece, but it felt very much like your performance. In your performance, there was a kind of echo, and I know you use the word echo, and there's also this other sense of echoing, this kind of circularity to what you're saying, and the kind of circularity of this kind of the repetition of certain words and phrases, and then the kind of repetition of your gestures, and this kind of rolling circularity that kind of comes through your verbalization of what you're listening to. But hang on, I'm coming back to something. It's gone from my head. But yeah, that was it. I was just going to say that the performance for me really looked like somebody speaking in tongues. So I've seen people speaking in tongues quite a bit, and there was something about the way that you spoke that really echoed that. And I think it was something about tuning into something elsewhere that's why it looked so much like somebody speaking in tongues. And there was this kind of transcendent aspect to it. So there was this sense that you were channeling something from elsewhere, but then the viscerality of it, the kind of constant reference to the mouth, to saliva, to a mouth being within a mouth, this kind of desiring, like sexual intimacy, a kind of erotic intimacy, also brought it into the body in a really powerful way. And I felt like there was a kind of tripartite relationship between your vocalization, the vocalization of the other person who we don't see but we know is there, and then the kind of a divine sort of breath or presence vocalizing through you both as well. So there was also a kind of absence and presence aspect going on throughout the performances as well. Yeah, I just really enjoyed it. It kind of brought up a lot of thoughts, and yeah, I thought it was a really powerful piece. I'll stop talking and let somebody else talk. But those are just a few of the thoughts that kind of it brought up for me. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate.
James, shall we have Mimi Whiteway?
Yes, let's.
Hi there. Yeah, I thought that was absolutely gorgeous performance, and I just felt like I had to say something because I was reading a book this morning that feels really relevant, which you might have come across, called Transgressive Devotion by an author called Natalie Wigg-Stevenson, who's talking about ways we can perform God rather than describe God, and kind of performs theologies through performance artworks as a kind of text, and then kind of talks about a lot of, just from loads of different angles. So I think you might find it interesting. But in relation to what just happened there, it really reminded me of how she kind of brought to question what happened on the night of the conception of Christ with Mary, and whether or not it's kind of safe to even, or people are comfortable to even think about that experience as one of erotic exchange and consent, and how, and then kind of in a different chapter but from another angle, is talking about a famous essay, and I can't remember the name or the writer, about the female orgasm, and thinking about the relationship between orgasm and prayer or divine ecstasy, and the way that they kind of rupture time, and how that rupture of time is so related to the incarnation, which is an eternal being coming to dwell in temporality. And I just thought your work, the way I've viewed tongues, funnily enough, even though it's always been seen as this kind of unbounded thing, it's always been in a very definite time frame. It maybe it's part of the liturgy in a charismatic service or whatever. So to hear this extended, slow, meditative, cyclical thing, to me just had such a profound, mystical kind of feeling to it. And I thought it also, as well as my kind of emotional response, that I was kind of dwelling there with you, it also, I feel, links really nicely to some of what Natalie Wigg-Stevenson was talking about.
I'm going to read a couple of other comments here in the chat, James. It's okay. Maria, I like the way you addressed how you felt unsure how to read this text yourself by entrusting it to somebody else's mouth, I think I read that before, didn't I?
That one, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and then Mark Dean says, thank you, Maria. Usually speaking in tongues is either represented as the activity of another exotic, brackets, culture, or as the property of a specific insular culture. I was interested in the way you found another space to address the subject.
Yeah, thank you. I definitely think the slowness also that Mimi was referencing is a big part of that. I think it's been a lot about zooming back into the body and sort of focusing on a physical experience, on a sort of bodily experience of it. And instead of sort of looking at a more theatrical approach, sort of going inward and like going more into experience, I'm also like very inspired by the work of queer theologians like Marcel Althaus-Reid, for example, who's really focused on the body and the experiences of the body as formative of our ideas of God and of the sacred. So I think that's a big way that works for
I'm conscious of the kind of, the time, the way that this session is going to work in terms of time. So maybe there is another comment there from Louise Ashcroft. And I just would have liked to have asked you something, but maybe I can ask you at the end, again, returning to that. And I will go back and read Louise's comment as well at the end, actually, if that's okay. And then
Yes,
move on now to Sister Carolyn's presentation. So thank you very much. Lots, very rich and quite unexpected, actually, in terms of the slowness. That's the thing, really, that was very powerful. For me, anyway. Sister Carolyn Morrison is a sister of the Religious of the Assumption, and she works for the Diocese of Westminster as a social outreach chaplain, and she is a theologian. Thank you, Carolyn. Over to you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Maria. It was really inspiring. I really enjoyed that, the slow meditative pace of your piece. It really was thought-provoking, so thank you for that. In this paper, I will explore the concept of the Blessed Virgin Mary as a model of faith as depicted in early Renaissance art, in order to discover how the Blessed Virgin Mary acts as a model of faith in and through the arts. I'm going to share with you an excerpt of something that I've been working on, namely a theological aesthetic framework for the interpretation of Christian art, which I call the sight of its beholding, the moment when the viewer encounters the image in the light of faith, which is developed in part from the works of Hans von Balthasar. I'm just going to share with you my screen now and take you through a slide presentation while I read. Oops. I will then apply the sight of its beholding to depictions of the Annunciation in early Renaissance art. In particular, I will explore Mary's model of faith through the 5 laudable states of the Virgin Mary, namely disquiet, reflection, inquiry, submission, and merit, which was developed by Friar Robert de Lisi in his preaching on the Annunciation in Sermons de Laudibus Sanctorum, Naples, 1489, sorry. So, how do images make their meaning known? According to Gillian Rose in Visual Methodologies, a critical framework for interpreting works of art normally consists of 4 sights: the sight of its production, where and how the image is made, the sight of the image itself, its visual contents, the sight of its circulation, where it travels, and the sight of its audiencing, where the image encounters its viewers, that is, how it is seen. In order to understand how images make their meaning known from a theological aesthetic perspective, I have replaced the sight of its audiencing with what I call the sight of its beholding, the moment when the viewer aesthetically encounters the image in the light of faith. St. Irenaeus of Lyon maintains that the glory of God is humanity fully alive, and the life of humanity consists in beholding God. According to the biblical scholar M.O. Evans, the word behold is of interest in relation to Christ insofar as, and I quote, we cannot clearly and fully behold the outshining of the spiritual grandeur in Christ Jesus, but in the gospel, God accommodates and adjusts the vision as we are able to bear it, and the glory beheld becomes glory imparted to and reflected by the beholder. What this means is that the act of beholding the Christ, even who see but a dim reflection as in a mirror, bears transformative qualities which in Christians, the beholder. As Balthasar writes, we behold the form, that is Jesus, but if we really behold it, it is not as a detached form, but rather it is in unity with the depths that make their appearance in it. We see form as the splendor of the glory of being. That is, in beholding the glory of Christ, the beholder is open to the process of being united and transformed into the likeness and image of God. For Balthasar, the act of beholding the form leads to a meditating vision, which occasions a rapture and a transport to an eros love, which he states is identified through two moments, namely beholding and perceiving. Balthasar says, if all beauty is objectively located in the intersection of two moments, which Thomas Aquinas calls species and lumen, that is form and splendor, then the encounter of these characterized by the two moments of beholding and perceiving the beautiful. The doctrine of the enrapturing power of the beautiful are complementarily structured, since no one can really behold who has not already been enraptured, and no one can be enraptured who has not already perceived. If we apply Balthasar's two moments of perceiving and beholding to viewing Christian art, then the viewer encounters the beauty of the form through the sight of its beholding. The act of beholding attaches the beholder to that which is beheld. This, in part, is a truth through contemplating the form, which allows the beholder to be enraptured and transported beyond the image into the realms of divine love. As Julian of Norwich writes in chapter 10 of Revelations of Divine Love, it is God's will that we seek him to the beholding of him, for by that he shall show him himself of his special graces when he will, and how a soul shall have him in its beholding. Thus, the act of beholding, that is vision, enables the beholder to encounter the form, while the beauty and of the splendor of the form is perceived through the power of being enraptured. Balthasar claims that it is this process that draws, pulls, and transports the believer up into God's world. That is, the beholder is not merely viewing a sacred image to look at and understand and enrich their knowledge. Rather, through the sight of its beholding, they seek to unite themselves to that which they behold, and are thus open to the possibility of participating in an act of spiritual communion. As William Blake, the poet, once says, we become what we behold. In light of the sight of its beholding, the moment when the viewer aesthetically encounters the image in the light of faith, we will now explore Mary's model of faith through the 5 laudable states of the Virgin Mary in early Renaissance art. At first glance, representations of the Annunciation in early Renaissance art seem to be almost identical in nature, but take a closer look and you will discover that they were not just variations on a theme, but rather they depict the 5 successive spiritual and mental conditions attributed to the Virgin Mary as described at the start of Luke's Gospel. Traditionally, these 5 moments have been seen as a model of faith that all believers are called to follow. According to Michael Baxendale in Painting and Experience in 15th century Italian art, artists and preachers in the 15th century worked hand in hand, a kind of duet of word and image, to explain the great mysteries of the faith to the largely illiterate faithful. The written word, the spoken word, and the painted word were intrinsically interwoven. One of the most famous preachers during the Renaissance era was Father Robert de Lisi. Friar Roberto's preaching on the Annunciation in Sermons de Laudibus Sanctorum distinguishes three principal mysteries. Firstly, the angelic mission. Secondly, the angelic salutation. And thirdly, the angelic colloquy. This third mystery, the angelic colloquy, he further subdivides into 5 laudable conditions of the Virgin Mary, namely disquiet, reflection, inquiry, submission, and merit. 7 centuries on, his precise psychological dissection still makes sense today. In Botticelli's Annunciation, we see the exact moment of the angel's opening words to Mary. Greetings, you who are highly favoured. The Lord is with you. Mary was greatly troubled at his words. According to Baxendale, Botticelli's Annunciation captures the moment of disquiet. The Virgin's posture and hand gestures seems to suggest that she is holding Gabriel at bay. She appears somewhat aghast, despite the angel's greeting of peace, despite his assurance that the Lord is with her, and despite his message that she is greatly blessed by the Lord. Mary is deeply troubled at his words. Could it be that she's not quite convinced by the angelic salutation? Friar Roberto tells us this disquiet comes not from incredulity, but from wonder. She, in her humility, was astonished and amazed. On the level of spiritual emotion, the Virgin is experiencing fear and reverence of the Lord, which Christians believe to be the foundation of all wisdom. In this painting, Botticelli is inviting the viewer to emulate and mirror Mary's response of disquiet, her piety. However, such depictions of the moment of disquiet were not popular among the vast majority of Renaissance artists. As Leonardo da Vinci writes, "Some days ago, I saw a picture of an angel who, in making the Annunciation, seemed to be trying to chase Mary out of her room, with movements showing the sort of attack one might make on some hated enemy. Mary, as if desperate, seemed to be trying to throw herself out of the window. Do not fall into errors like these." Friar Roberto tells us that the second laudable state of the Virgin is one of reflection. Returning to the Gospel narrative, we see the exact moment that the artist Friar Carnevali is attempting to capture in his depiction of the Annunciation. She wondered what kind of greeting this might be. The angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favour with God. And behold, you will conceive and give birth to a son, and you are to call him Jesus." In Friar Carnevali's representation of the Annunciation, we see that the Virgin has moved from a state of disquiet to one of reflection. She has been calmed and reassured by the angelic colloquy, "Do not be afraid, Mary." This is reflected in the Virgin's posture and hand gestures. Her left hand is placed upon her womb, while her right hand now rests upon her heart, which signifies a state of reflection. Gabriel is on one knee. He holds a stem of lilies in his hands as a sign that her virginity will remain intact. The Holy Spirit is represented in the form of a dove, is seen in the distance descending from on high. It is issuing golden rays of light in her direction in anticipation of her fiat, her yes to God. Yet for now, at this precise moment, the artist captures Mary in a state of reflection, as she ponders the proposal to behold and thus conceive the word of God. As Bernard of Clairvaux wrote, the whole world awaits Mary's reply. In a painting of the Annunciation by Filippo Lippi, the angel Gabriel is now in an upright stance, gathering up his cloak as if he has just risen from kneeling. If we look closely, we see that the Virgin's mood has moved from one of reflection to one of inquiry. This is reflected in the position of our left hand. It is held aloft, which signifies inquiry, almost the posture of a student asking a question in a lecture. For Christians, Mary is seen as the ideal model of a person of good faith. She is not afraid to ask questions. As the sacred text tells us, Mary inquired of the angel, "I am a virgin, how can this be?" The angel replies, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you and God's power will rest upon you. For this reason, the Holy Child will be called the Son of God." It is this exact moment within the angelic colloquy that the artist has captured. Mary's condition is laudable, that is praiseworthy, because it is good to have a faith that inquires. This is based on the Christian belief that the God revealed in Jesus Christ prompts a questioning search for deeper understanding on the part of the believer. In Friar Angelico's depiction of the Annunciation, we see that Mary's posture has moved from the state of inquiry to one of submission. Mary is seen in a kneeling position, sometimes sitting. Her arms are crossed, her head is slightly bowed. She has submitted herself completely to the will of God and his plan of divine unification. Friar Angelico's representation of the Annunciation has captured the exact moment of Mary's response. "Behold, I am the Lord's servant. May it happen to me as you have said." Mary introduces her fiat, which quite simply means yes, or more literally, "be it done," with the word "behold." Mary's mirrored usage of the word "behold" signifies that she has appropriated the message and reciprocates it. This suggests a hierarchy of beholding, namely the beholding of God and the beholding of humankind, what Julian of Norwich describes as the two demons. And I quote, "For in beholding God we fall not, and in beholding of the self we stand not. And both of these be sooth in my sight. But the beholding of our Lord is the highest of soothlessness." Friar Roberto tells us the last of the 5 laudable conditions of the Virgin Mary is merit. Returning to the angelic colloquy, we see the exact moment that Friar Angelico is attempting to capture. It is contained in the very last sentence, which reads, "And the angel left her." Depictions in art of the Virgin on her own belong to the type called Annunciate rather than Annunciation. Like the Annunciation, Friar Angelico's Annunciate portrays Mary with her head bowed in submission. Her arms remained crossed, but now she is alone. She clasps a book in her left hand. Her index finger holds the pages of the book ajar, pointing to the word of God. Her stomach appears slightly swollen. She is with child. The Virgin has believed and assented to the message of the angel. Thus, her state is praiseworthy, laudable, and meritorious. The 5 successive laudable conditions of the Virgin Mary are now complete. Mary's response to the angelic colloquy is considered to be a model of faith that all Christians are called to follow. Mary's model of faith can therefore be summarized in 5 steps. disquiet, the fear of the Lord, seen as wonder and awe, the moment when the beholder realizes that God is asking something of them personally. Reflection on what God is asking the believer to be or do. Inquiry, how can this be, since such and such? Submission, Mary's fiat, humble consent to God's instruction. The final stage to Mary's model of faith is merit. Doing God's will is laudable, praiseworthy, and meritorious. To conclude, art, like faith, invites the viewer to participate in the scene, yet it is always the free choice on the part of the viewer or believer to either take a fleeting glance or fix his or her gaze and behold the beauty of the form. In this sense, art perceived through the sight of its beholding acts as a bridge to the transcendental and sheds light on the lived experiences of the saints. By beholding the word of God in image form and modeling our responses on that of the Virgin Mary, we too can grow in holiness. Baxendale tells us that it's worth noting that in art history, the most popular depictions of the Annunciation in early Renaissance art were the moments of submission, which were closely followed by the moments of inquiry and reflection. Fewer paintings remain or ever existed of the moment of disquiet and merit. However, from a theological perspective, this, of course, does not apply to the 5 steps of Mary's model of faith, inasmuch as disquiet and merit are very much part of the process of discerning God's will for us.
Thanks very much. Once again, anybody who wants to write can write. Anybody who wants to talk can put their hand up. And yeah, if Nina, do you have any kind of introductory question while people are thinking? At the moment, you're muted. Nina, you're muted at the moment.
Well, again, a very, like Maria's talk, something that I felt was a very slow kind of engagement with something, you know, that the slowness of it, you know, the closing in on the idea in the first part of the talk, which I did have some questions about, and then the closing in on the slowing down, our slowing down into the images. Was fantastic. Yeah, in the same way that Maria slowed us down and made us engage with slowness as a kind of form of engagement, maybe of beholding, I don't know. But I did want to maybe just ask about this form, whether this form, well, 2 things really. Does beholding involve, like Teresa, you know, Saint Teresa had in the mystical tradition, you know, that she was sort of thinking very much about this engagement with the image. And I just wonder in what you're saying, you know, with beholding, whether the intellect plays any part in this, or whether, you know, what part does the intellect play, or does it play any part at all?
Yes, very much so. Von Balthasar would say that it is the intellect is very much a part of the process of beholding, because you have to perceive before you can behold. So perceiving and then beholding. So yes, very much so. That's exactly what he's saying. He's saying that in order to, but he says it's almost like a circular thing. You can't have one without you have to perceive, behold, and then the enrapture happens, that unification. So that the 3 steps.
Yeah, that's right. And then if nobody else has any questions. I just wanted to say the form, you know, like the form that is somehow, I wonder whether the form is something that exists, that has to pre-exist, or whether it's created through this process of beholding and through this, the perception, the beholding, and the rapture. You know, what is the form? You know, can one experience these stages in forms that are not adequate to it? You know, is the form always a religious form? What is the pictorial? Is it what is the form?
Okay, so in this sense, what von Balthasar is talking about is sacred images. So he's looking at any sacred image or religious image, and how do we behold, perceive and behold and be enraptured by. And it's moving beyond the image, the painting, for instance, or the icon. You move beyond that, and that's the enrapture happens. If you just stay at the level of just viewing the work of art, rather than being transported, or then you haven't, it's idolatry. You've got to be transported beyond that. Art takes us beyond what it is, and that's what the artist is hopefully trying to do, is to transport the viewer beyond the image into a dialogue with the divine, and to be enraptured. So that's that spiritual sense of going beyond the self.
Thank you.
Okay. There's Mark has also got his hand up. Let's hear from Mark.
Thank you so much, Sister Carolyn. That was really fascinating. I was really wondering whether this model of faith, which I think I personally, you know, I sort of identified with in terms of my own experience, but also as someone who was called to faith, I guess, but also as an artist, you know, who, I mean, using words like inspiration can be a bit difficult, but certainly getting ideas, you know, and getting motivated to make something out of those ideas and experiences. You know, there's a process that I think is akin to this 5-stage process. I could certainly map it on, but I just wondered whether classically it's understood as a sort of linear process with a sort of telos of merit, or whether it's cyclical, and so whether disquiet returns. I guess in Mary's case, when she experienced the passion of her and death of her son, or other people, you know, in faith where you have doubt returns, etc.
I think that's a really good point, Mark. It's that sort of, it's an ongoing process. It's an ongoing conversion in every time, and the model of faith to be used is something that at each time we have a joy, something that we want to share with God, something we're being asked to do as someone that's being called to do something, then going through that process. And it's realizing it's engaging with the process to realize what stage are you at. For instance, if you was all of a sudden realize that you're being called to move to a different location and a different job, all of a sudden you get a bit of disquiet about that. You might get you might be hooray, and you know, no discernment needed. But those moments of disquiet, oh, I think God's asking this of me here. And then you have the moment of reflection, and then inquire, well, how can that happen, being so I can't afford a new house in that area, or something like that, you know, applying it to your own particular circumstances, and then just submitting to the providence of God. And that in itself is recognized, submitting to God's will, once you've made a discernment, of course, and that's usually done through prayer and through a spiritual director, ordinarily in Christian belief. Then you have that moment of merit, because you've you faithfully think and discern that you're doing God's will. So that process is continuously, it's like the pastoral circle. You go over that and deepen that. And the more times that you go through that process, you're able to deepen your intimacy and relationship with God. And you start to realize, oh, right, I think this is a moment of potential disquiet. I think this is a moment of reflection and inquiry, and so on. And that continues, that process of continuation.
Thank you.
Okay, so if anyone else wants to ask something, they should do it quite quickly, or otherwise they might think of things to say at the end of all three presentations.
Maybe just, I mean, I don't know if it's quickly, but I just was wondering whether there's something about this process, the first part, the beholding process, which you've talked about, and the perceiving and the beholding, and the form, this relationship between these things, as whether, and the fact that the form that you said is a sacred form, isn't already given, it's a given form, as given as sacred. I mean, I just wonder whether there's anything about that beholding process which can transform a non-sacred form into a sacred form.
Yes, precisely.
You know, so it has a transformative power, not on yourself, but on the object, on the form.
Yeah. If I'm right in understanding your question, the beholding, that's why Mary replies, "Behold, I am the handmaid of the Lord." She's now asking for people to behold her, which is non-divine, human, and beholding the form. We are made, we believe as Christians, that we're made in the image of Christ, the original form. And so by contemplating another human being and seeing the beauty of creation in them, that is a sense of beholding. And therefore that should, again, lead you beyond into a spiritual experience, seeing the beauty of the character or in someone else. So that would, I would say, certainly it doesn't have to be Christ's form, because we're all made in the image of Christ. So if beholding, you know, your friend or your lover, it's that beholding, we are called to behold each other in the light of Christ.
More thing, and then we must move on to the next person. I liked from Natalia Belter, I liked how you said in the fiat that Mary appropriated the message from God, then submits and takes it on. That's an interesting use of the word appropriate. I've never thought of appropriating as a spiritual sacred process. So thank you for that. Thank you for a beautiful talk.